Brad Garrett joins us, ABC News crime and terrorism analyst. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning, McGraw.
So fill us in on this new ISIS theory, or is it a theory, or is it a fact that they're telling these people to sort of wreak havoc in your hometown and stay where you are? What's going on?
That's clearly the key at this point, that they are trying to encourage people in place. They specifically mentioned using vehicles to drive over people or stepping out and stabbing people, which we had recently at Ohio State. So, in my view, McGraw, we've moved now into the land of low-tech attacks, difficult to defense against unless you know about them. But that's sort of, in my view, day in and day out, the biggest threat probably here.
So, one, you can be petrified of this, say, oh my goodness, this is terrible, but it's also a sign that ISIS is getting weaker and can't perform any grand attacks, so this is sort of their last gasp, in a sense.
In a way. But the problem is that all these other extremist groups are doing the same thing, Al-Qaeda, etc. So think about it this way, McGraw. One person can literally cause so much havoc. They can kill maybe not large numbers of people, but they inflict fear. They cost a jurisdiction hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to investigate, to respond. So some of this is driven by two things. So you and I will be more fearful and to sort of economically bankrupt us, which, I don't think that's going to happen, but it puts a real strain on city and county services when these things happen.
You harbor back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s where you had the Irish Republic, the IRA, dropping bombs or having bombs go off all over London and Northern Ireland, and it's sort of a similar tactic. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's certainly fair from the following standpoint, that when you go to individuals or what I'm going to call fairly low-tech attacks, bombs may be one step up, but not a huge step. Boy, unless because of all of the public venues where you could do things, really almost impossible to defense against. It's much like, McGraw, if you were going to have a bank robbery this afternoon in some place in St. Louis, well, the FBI and the local police are not going to stop that bank robbery unless they know it's going to be robbed by person X.
Yeah.
They can stop him or her. So it's the same way with this stuff, because all these things are premeditated. There are pieces of intel out there in communities, in households, various locations, that somebody's going to tell law enforcement about what's going on with particular individuals. That's the key.
It's also a situation where the Syrian refugees aren't going to come to America. Oftentimes it's going to be American citizens who are inspired and who have sort of gone to the dark side. So that's going to be even harder because they're not going to be your traditional Islamic terrorist.
Right. They're not going to be, you're right. They're not going to have traveled to the obvious locations. They're either going to become self-radicalized or maybe had minimal online training. But let's face it, to steal a truck and drive it into a bunch of people, you don't really have to be a rocket scientist to do that.
Yeah. Brad Garrett, ABC News crime and terrorism analyst. Brad, thanks for checking in. Merry Christmas.
Same to you, McGraw. Take care.
755, Big 550, KTRS. We had that guest on yesterday who was telling us about all of these somewhat normal American teenagers, young adults who are born in America, raised as Americans, oftentimes come from wealthy families, oftentimes come from Christian backgrounds, have sort of left all of that to become ISIS sympathizers, left and gone to Syria or whatever else. Well, you don't have to go to Syria now. You just sort of wreak havoc in your own neighborhood. So, but again, I sort of hearken it to, people forget the 70s and the 80s with the bombs going off in London undergrounds, right? And it was all sort of IRA sponsored, where every other week, every other month, you'd hear another bomb went off or something, and that's just how the way people lived for decades.
I know the marathon bombers in Boston, a little different because I don't believe they were actually born here in the United States, but they lived here. And,
right, yeah.
And it's kind of along those lines.
Kind of a similar deal, yeah. 756, Big 550, KT.